You know that feeling, right? When you're the one in charge, the one making the calls. The pressure is real. And it seems like every single week, there's another headline about some big company that stumbled. And it almost always comes back to one thing. They just didn't see the risks coming. So that begs the question, doesn't it? When it comes to those huge company-defining risks, who should really be steering the ship? The CEO? The whole management team? Well, the answer is actually way more structured than just pointing a finger at the person with the corner office. Let's dive into the system that's designed to figure that out. In this explainer, we're going to look at the architecture that lets companies make smart, calculated decisions. It's a system called risk governance, and it's all about learning how to take the right risks to win. Here's what we've got lined up. First, we'll see just how high the stakes are when you get this wrong. Then, we'll nail down what risk governance actually is and clear up the different jobs for the board and management. After that, we'll pop the hood on the engine that drives it all, and finally, we'll totally reframe how you should think about risk, not as something to fear, but as a real opportunity. All right, first up, let's set the stage. Why is everyone in boardrooms talking about risk governance all of a sudden? Well, it's because the consequences of dropping the ball are just massive. You see those crazy headlines about corporate meltdowns, they almost always trace back to a basic failure to handle risk and uncertainty. This isn't just some textbook theory. It's a real-world high-stakes game. Okay, so if that's the problem, what's the solution? Well, it all starts with building the right foundation. And that, my friends, is risk governance. Think of risk governance less like a single rule and more like the entire blueprint for how a company makes decisions. It's the structure, the framework that holds everything together, defining the rules of the game and guiding leaders to make smart, informed choices. And this isn't just a nice-to-have idea anymore. It's becoming a formal requirement. Take Singapore's Code of Corporate Governance, for instance. They specifically made risk governance a key principle, putting the responsibilities squarely on the board of directors. The message couldn't be clearer. The buck stops at the very top. So if the board is ultimately responsible, what does that actually look like in practice? This is where you have to understand the two very different but equally important roles of the board and management. Yeah, it really all boils down to one simple question. Who's in charge of setting the direction, and who's in charge of actually getting it done? Here's the breakdown. The board's job is all about oversight. They're the ones who decide which big strategic risks are actually worth taking, and they make sure the right safety nets are in place. Management, on the other hand, is all about design and execution. They're the builders. They create and run the day-to-day risk systems, all based on the game plan the board has laid out. You see, it's a partnership that has to be perfectly balanced. Think of it like this. The board is responsible for picking the destination for a road trip. Management's job is to build the car, check the engine, and then actually drive everyone there safely. One just can't work without the other. Okay, so we've got the blueprint and we know who's doing what. Now let's look under the hood at the actual engine that makes this whole thing run. The Enterprise Risk Management Framework, or ERM for short. Let me be clear, a great risk governance strategy is pretty much useless if you don't have a strong ERM framework. This is the nuts and bolts, the practical system that a company uses to manage risk across every single department. So a solid ERM framework is built on 6 key things. It all starts with strategy and policy, making sure your risk approach lines up with your big goals. Then you've got the process and structure. That's the how and the who of day-to-day risk management. But just as critical is the culture. You need everyone thinking about risk, which is supported by the right systems and tools. And finally, there's assurance, which is basically the quality check to make sure the whole system is actually working. Now, here's probably one of the most important takeaways from all of this. Too many companies treat risk management like an accessory, something they just kind of tack on to their existing way of doing things. When really, it needs to be built in from the ground up. It has to be a core part of your strategy, your operations, your culture. Because when it's truly built in, risk management stops being a chore and starts becoming a serious competitive advantage. And that brings us to our final point, which is really the whole reason we do any of this. What's the ultimate goal of all this structure, all this process? Here's the huge mindset shift. Having effective risk governance doesn't mean you stop taking risks. Not at all. It means you become risk intelligent. It gives you the confidence and the framework to be really smart about the risks you choose to take. Because you've got to remember, every single opportunity, every chance you have to grow and get ahead comes with risk. You literally can't have one without the other. The goal isn't to avoid it, but to understand it, manage it, and use it to your advantage.
It kind of reminds me of what the poet T.S. Eliot said. Only those who will risk going too far can possibly find out how far one can go. When you master risk governance, you give your organization the confidence to really push the boundaries. It's about having the right systems in place so you have the courage to ask, so how far can we go?